Let's look at commenting code. In CSS, there's a good way to comment code, but it's a little bit different from HTML. So in HTML, and I'm just leaving off from the last lesson here, that's where I got this code from. In HTML, we have less than, exclamation mark, dash dash, and in here, we have an HTML comment. In CSS, it's kind of similar, kind of different. Same, but different, you know? So in here, in our style element, we do slash asterisk, and you can see it turned everything below here gray. And then we can say, this is a CSS comment. And to close it, we do asterisk, and then that same slash. So we just do it backwards. So this is the forward, this is the opening one, and this is the closing one. And this is a CSS comment. And so you can write what your CSS is doing. You can comment out your code like this. I'm going to do a shortcut way on VS Code. I can do command. It's command plus slash. On Windows, it's going to be control plus slash. And so I just go to this line here and I hit command or control slash and it comments it out. So in the last lesson, what we did was we were targeting this little ME here. But because I commented that code out, my browser is now going to say, oh, okay, I know that there's code here, but it's in a comment, so don't execute it, don't do anything with it, don't even think about it, just pretend it doesn't exist. And when I hit refresh, we're going to see that this changes back to black, and it's still going to be italicized, but it's not going to be blue anymore. Just like that. And so code comments are really good for leaving your thoughts, your ideas, your to-dos. If you, let's say you're working for 2 hours tonight and then it's bedtime and you want to pick it up in the morning, you're going to see this a lot. To do a thing in here, something like that. Or if you're just testing out code and you want to comment or uncomment, you can always just test it out like this. And all I'm doing is commenting and uncommenting with command slash or control slash. Let's take a look at text colors now. Now, we've been working with this a lot. I think we're pretty familiar with how this works, but just leaving off from that last lesson, we're selecting P strong I, which is going to be down here, P strong and then I. We're going to target that ME. And let's make this really obnoxious so we can really see what we're working with here. Font size is going to be 50 pixels, and we're going to change that color to blue. So if I go back here, this is going to be a big ME. It's going to be blue. It's going to be italicized. We're going to see it just like that. But we've been typing names like blue or red, and we can see that if we type in color and then hit a colon, that VS Code is nice enough to give us all sorts of options in here. Now, these are nice, but when you're working with a designer, they're not going to be using these perfect colors. They're going to be using different styles. Or not styles, but very, very particular colors. So if we wanted to, we could have like black. Let's scroll up here. We have black. What about gray? How many different colors of gray are there? Look at that. There's light gray. There's probably something like a medium gray. There's all sorts of different types of gray in here. But we don't have to stick with just a name. We can stick with a hex as well. And so this is called a hex, and it's usually 6 characters or 3 characters. So it's like FFF, FFF. And you're going to see that VS Code has said, oh yeah, okay, that's white. We can do 000, 000, 000, and that's going to be black. Now, if the last 3 characters are repeating from the first 3 characters, we can shortcut it and just say 000 or FFF. Or if we wanted an eggshell white, we could do something like F5, F5, F5. These are 2 very common ways to add colors. Now, as you're learning CSS, it's totally okay to use like red, blue, black, gray, green, yellow, orange, whatever color you want to actually type out. But when you actually start working with a real design, it's going to be very specific. So it's not just going to be FF 0, 0, 0, 0. So that's red. It's not going to be the perfect color red all the time because that's an obnoxious color red. Maybe it's going to be a darker red, slightly lighter red, maybe just an off shade of red. Your designer is going to be making that choice for you. And so you're going to want to make sure that whatever they're using, you can use. And so that's where hexes come in, hex colors. There's nothing to do in this lesson. I just wanted to show you that this is how these work. And you can have, again, a color, like a named color, or instead of black, you can have $0, 000, which is the same as 000. Okay, let's take a look at different color types. In the last lesson, we looked at named colors and hexes, but there's another one. Actually, there's a few of them. But the three you're going to be using for the most part are named colors, hex colors, and RGB/RGBA. And I'm going to show you what RGB and RGBA are in this lesson. So first things first, I just have a blank document here. Let's go ahead and create an H1, just because it's nice large text. And it's going to say change my color. And when I refresh my page, it just says change my color. So nothing fancy. Now I can select this H1, and I can say color is equal to blue. And it changes it to blue. Or I can say red, changes it to red. Or I can say change it to FF0000. That's enough, yep. And so that changes it to red. Again, nothing changes. Now there's also another way to do this. We can do RGBA. So RGB or RGBA. So RGB is red, green, blue, and RGBA is red, green, blue, alpha. Now let's do RGB first. So let's change this color to 125, that's red, 125 blue, and 125 green. I did that backwards. Red, green, blue, nailed it. And so let's see what 125 is. Now the highest number you can go to is 255, so make sure it's between 0 and 255. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like now. It's a shade of gray. It's about 50% gray. You're going to see this a lot as well, mostly when you're dealing with base colors like black, for instance. So 000, black is the absence of color in science, and that means 0 red, 0 green, 0 blue. Changes it back to black. Now, if we wanted to make this transparent a little bit, we could do RGBA, and as that fourth parameter here, we could say comma, and then instead of like 50%, we use a decimal. And so let's do 0.5, and that's 50%. And this is just like grade 7 mathematics, something like that, where 1 is equal to 100%, 0 is equal to 0%, 0.5 is equal to 50%. So this is going to be black, but it's going to be 50% see-through. So it's going to look gray, just like that. Now let's go ahead and change that background color of the body. We can say body, background color, and let's change this to red. And we're going to see that this probably isn't going to look gray anymore. It kind of looks a little bit see-through. So it kind of looks like a darker red just because it's black, but it's 50% see-through. And so it takes on the color that's behind it. Now again, when you're working with designers in the future, they're going to be using RGBA a lot, just because that alpha, that transparency, is really, really nice to work with. What I would like you to do is give this a shot. Use RGB and then RGBA. You might have to Google a couple of different colors. You can Google like, what is the color yellow in RGB? And then you can change the alpha with RGBA. Let's talk about links. Links are pretty ugly by default. They're usually blue if they're not clicked, and then purple if they are clicked. So I'm just gonna clean this code up from the last lesson here. Give us some room to work. And so let's say we have some lorem ipsum in here, and we wanted to make a link. We could do this. href is equal to https caleb.io. And let's turn this into a link and some extra white space. And so, because we know in HTML, white space doesn't matter, let's refresh our page and we can see we have all of this in one line and there's a link. Now this link is purple by default because I've already gone to caleb.io. If you haven't gone there, it's going to be blue. Let's go ahead and change this. So we can select this link with an A element because it's the only link on the page, so we can select it and it's totally fine. We don't have to worry about multiple links with multiple styles. And we can say the color of this is going to be red. And when we refresh our page, it's red. Now that doesn't look very good. Let's start making things look a little nicer. Let's say that color has to be black. It has to fit in with the rest of the text here. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. But what happens when I click and hold? Depending on your browser, that can actually change. What we want to do here is we want to be able to change these states, these link states. So now what we can say is A, and you can see when I do 1: after the A selector, it gives me all sorts of things to choose from. Some of these are pseudo selectors, some of these are just regular selectors. Let's go ahead and use hover. What happens when we put our mouse over the link? And so the syntax for this is our selector and then our state. And when we hover over this, let's change the color to blue. So I just saved that, and when I go back to the page, you can actually see nothing happens. When I refresh, however, I'll put my mouse over it and it's going to turn blue, just like that. So now we have some sort of interactivity using just CSS. There's also an active state, so A, active, and that's when you click and hold. So when you do click and hold, let's change that color to red. So let's save that, refresh our page. When I hover over, it turns blue. When I click and hold, it turns red. So these are the different states of a link. We're saying by default, make it black. When you hover over it with an action with your mouse, make it blue. And when you click it, make it red. The last one we have here is visited. So we could say any link that has been visited, change the color of that. Let's change this one to something that's gonna be really hard to see, but very noticeable, yellow. And because I've already clicked this link, right? I click it, takes me here, I go back. Because I visited this link already, it's now yellow. And these are the different link states. So go ahead and give this a shot. I want you to create a link on your page, change the default color, change the hover color, change the active color, and change the visited color. I want you to experiment with these and get a little bit of experience with it because you're going to be using this probably every single day as a front-end web developer. All right, let's take a look at font sizes. So font sizing, we've actually worked with this a little bit. All I'm going to do here is create an H1 and put some lorem ipsum in there. And when I show you the page, yep, that is pretty obnoxious. But we can change this. And let's give this a class of small. That's just what we're going to call it. And so we can say select all the H1s on the page with a class of small. And this is new. This is a new selector. We haven't seen this yet. So we're going to select every H1 and then make sure we only select the H1s out of that group that have the class of small. And we can do font size. And let's make this like super tiny, like 3 pixels. So I'm going to save that, refresh, and it's super tiny. I'm zoomed in quite a bit too. I'm at 200%. If I zoom out to 100%, yeah, you can't even see that whatsoever. 200%, you can barely even see that. So that's how we change the font size. And that's the font size declaration. So it's font-size, space, and then your measurement. Now we don't use a measurement like 3 because 3 is not going to do anything. If I do this, refresh, it's almost like nothing happened. And what I can do here is comment this line out. So it's as if it doesn't exist. Refresh the page and we can see that nothing is happening. And that's because I gave it an improper measurement type. So I said 3, or I could say 3 pixels, and that's actually going to do something. Let's go ahead and change that to like 30 pixels. Okay, it's a little bit smaller. What happens if we said 75 pixels? This is going to be huge, just like that. So that's the font size. There's not really much to do here. You've probably already worked with font size in one of the previous examples already, just because I was using it as a way to example other things. But if you haven't used the font size declaration yet, go ahead and give this a shot. Don't forget to use pixels. There are other measurements, but we're going to talk about measurements in the next lesson. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about measurements. So in most CSS, not all, but most, we are going to be using measurements such as pixels, ems, rems, things like that. So these are all different types of measurement styles, but for the most part in this course, we're going to be sticking with pixels, just because it's the easiest to wrap our head around. For funsies, if you really want to level up your CSS game right now, you can always go off and Google what an EM is, an M, and you can always go and Google what an REM is, REM. But throughout the rest of this course, we are going to be sticking with pixels, just because it's a little more absolute and easier for us to understand at the very beginning. And again, this is a CSS 101 basics course, so we want to stick with just the basics for now. But even when you're working with a designer, a design is going to come in and it's going to say that something has, for example, a height of exactly 50 pixels. And so you might want to be using pixels for the most part anyways, instead of Ms or Rems, just because it is a lot more absolute. So there's nothing wrong with using pixels. We're going to be using pixels moving forward. But if you want to level up your game, you can always Google what an M is and what a Rem is. Background colors. Okay, let's save this page. This is a blank page. And when I refresh my page here, we see absolutely nothing. Now we've worked with background colors a little bit, but let's go ahead and start making our page look a little nicer. Let's actually start working with some stuff that we can keep. So I'm going to select my body element, and I want to give this a background dash color and then a particular color. Now I know I want off-white, and this might be a little bit hard to see at first, but hopefully when I do the transition, it shows up in the video. So this is just regular white, and if I refresh, you can see it's a little bit off now. Now what I can do is I can always right-click, inspect, click my body, and you can see the background color is F5, F5, F5. What if I wanted to change that to red, F00, or black, 000, or default white? Doesn't do anything. F5, 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 and this is what it's going to look like when I toggle this on and off. So white, off-white, white, off-white, something like that, just so it's not as hard on the user's eyes. We could also do something a little darker, F0, 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 and we can toggle this on and off as well. So now we have a very light gray color. So that's a background color. You can use a hex color, you can use a name color, you can use an RGB or an RGBA if you wanted to. We learned about color types already, so feel free to use any color type you are familiar with. Background images. Let's go ahead and add a background image to our page. Now a background image has slightly different syntax. We can say background image, and we do image. In HTML, it's img. In CSS, we actually type it out. It's image. And this one isn't just like website.com/img.jpg. Not quite like that. It's very similar, but not quite. Instead, what we do is URL braces or parentheses, and then we put the link in here. Now, this can be a relative link. This can be an image that's in your same folder, or it can be an absolute link. And we learned about those in HTML, so you should be familiar with pathing and absolute and relative links by now. Now, I don't currently have an image. Let's go ahead and grab an image. I'm going to go to unsplash.com. And let's go ahead and grab this cool image, because this is pretty nice looking. Let's grab that original size. That's going to be a big image, but let's grab it. And I just put that image into my CSS folder. So it's right beside my index.html. It's called background.jpg. And you can see in VS Code it shows up here. And when I click it, we can actually see what it looks like. So that's pretty cool. And in the URL, I'm going to say background. I'm going to have to make this just a touch smaller. Background.jpg. And that's going to link, and VS Code is actually smart enough to use this one, but it's going to link to this one over here. And this is a relative link. So let's go ahead, go back to our page, and even though we have a background color, the background image is going to take precedence. So let's go ahead and refresh. And, well, we don't see anything because that image was far too big. So let's go ahead and try to contain this image now. We can do background size, and VS Code is going to give us options there, like we saw. Contain or cover. Let's go with contain and see what the difference is between contain and cover. So save that, refresh. And it looks like the image is showing up over and over and over again. And in fact, you know what, this might have actually been too big of an image. So what we can do here is, let's just go back to Unsplash. Let's grab a different image, something that's going to be a little bit, I want it to look cool, but I also want it to be smaller. So let's grab this photo of Chewie here. Let's download a smaller image, a small one. So now I have two background images. I've got background.jpg, I've also got chewie.jpg. Let's open up VS Code. We can see it in here. This is Chewie. I purposely downloaded a smaller image. And let's go ahead, comment this out. Let's just backtrack a bit. And let's type in chewie.jpg, that matches the name over here. And with a standard background, there we go, that's better. And we can actually see it's repeating over here a little bit. Let's get rid of this. And that's totally okay. So now let's see what the background size contain does. It makes this image contained in the body element over and over and over and over and over again. What about cover? Cover makes sure that the image takes the entire width, the entire spacing of the entire body element. Now, what's cool about this is we can say div, stuff here, and we can change this from a body to a div. So let's select our only div on the page and refresh. And we can see that it's sort of starting to show up there. Let's go ahead and give this a height as well. Just for funsies, let's do 300 pixels. There we go. We can also give us a background color of something darker. Let's do 000. But we have to move this onto the body. So now we're getting into a little bit of refactoring. This is completely normal. You're going to be doing a lot of refactoring as you start to write more and more code as well. So now we've got a background color of black. We can see the image in here. And it's going to take up as much space as it can from this element. So if we change this height from 300 pixels to 100 pixels, we only see basically the sky. Let's do 200 pixels. And we can see just their heads. Let's change that background size from cover. Let's change it back to contain. And so what this is going to do is try to take this whole image and it's going to contain it in here. Now it's repeating because we want to see the whole image, but it also wants to by default take up as much width as possible. So let's go ahead and change that background repeating. We can do background. Nope, not color. Repeat. And then we can repeat on the x-axis, y-axis, or no repeat. So let's say repeat on the, no, it's already repeating on the x-axis. Let's go ahead and say no repeat. And now we have an image on a page using a div. And this is a common practice. You're going to see this a lot. There is no image element. It's just the background. Now let's see what happens when we go in here and we change this to our old one, background.jpg. We can see that shows up in there as well. And let's just go ahead and undo that. And so this is background images in a nutshell. You have your background image, your URL to whatever resource. You have a background size, contain, you have background repeat. There's also things like background positioning. So we could do background position, and this is going to take, oh, look at all these different measurements. CH, CM, EM, EX, FR, IM, all sorts of things in here. But these ones, we actually want to use the named ones. Let's go ahead and say center on the left axis, or the x-axis, left and right, and then center on the y-axis. That's top and bottom. And now we have an image that is perfectly centered. And what you can't see over here is our text still shows up, but we've just centered that image. Now, what I would like you to do is go to unsplash.com, grab an image, any image, change the background size, change how it repeats, change its positioning as well. And if you need a little bit of help with that on a div instead of on a body, you can always just set the height to like 200 pixels and you can make sure that the image actually works on your page because it's all about positioning. That's really what background images are about. It's about specialized positioning. Let's look at the inspect tool. We did this in our HTML 101 and HTML 201 courses as well. We can always right click on the page and go to inspect. And this is really important because we can click on an element like a body and we can see the styling. So I clicked on right click, inspect, make sure you're in the elements tab, and then in the sub tab, you want styles, not computed or event listeners, you want styles. And then I just select the body. and it's got a background color. I can toggle this on and off, or I can change it if I wanted to. I could change it to red, make it really obnoxious. I could even go in here into the body itself, and I could say color is equal to white, and let's change that background color back to black. And all I'm doing is clicking around here. So I click in here, it lets me create a new declaration, new property and value, or I can go in here and I can just click white, edit it, or I can go in here and change the color from color to background color and overwrite it, background color. And to toggle these on and off, all we have to do is click that checkbox on and off. Now where this gets really handy is in that last lesson, we set a background image on this div. Now, what if you don't know all the values? And because CSS has a lot of properties, it also has a lot of values. And a lot of this comes down to sort of memorization and understanding where you can get your answers from. So you have a background size here. I'm just going to click on contain. It selects it for me, delete. And now I can go to auto, contain, cover, and I'm just toggling through these. I'm just hitting my down arrow and we can see what these look like. So we have three main ones here. So auto is the same as initial, as revert and unset, but contain and cover are different. So we can see what we're looking for here. Now, why this is important is because if we go back to contain and we wanted to change the height, we could do this. We can make that height bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're actually not going to see too much here. But we can make it smaller, and that's just because my inspect tool was in the way. And there we go. I don't know why it made height a second time for 201 pixels, but all I did was click on the original 200 and go up or down. I'm hitting the up arrow or the down arrow. We can also change this to something massive like 3000 pixels, which is going to be huge. Or we can change the height to 300 pixels. And if we want to experiment, that's cool. We can absolutely do that. We can toggle it on and off, see what the default is. We can do all sorts of things. And if you're ever like, ooh, you know what else is there? You can always just type in background and you can see all these different things. There's background attachment, blend mode, clip, color, image, origin, position, position X, and position Y, repeat, you know, it goes on and on and on and on. There's all sorts of stuff in here. And so if you're ever like, oh, I want to learn more about background images, for example, you can absolutely do that by going into your browser. And the nice thing about this is you don't actually need internet for this whatsoever. You don't need to be able to Google it. You don't need to be able to Bing search it or look for an answer on Stack Overflow. You can do all of this right in your browser. Now, the last thing to note is I'm going to change a few of these things. Let's say I get rid of centering and I change it to be this. If I hit refresh, it's going to go back to the default value. And that's because we didn't actually change anything in our file here. This file is untouched. What our browser essentially does is takes a copy of our index.html file and renders it, and then says, oh, this is the stuff that was rendered. Here, you can play with it. It's a sandbox, it's a playground. So when I hit refresh, it's going to go back to the normal page and I'm going to lose my progress. So usually what I do is I'll change something in there and then I'll take all this, copy it, copy, and then I'll just throw it in here and paste. And then I'll just fix up sort of the syntax here to make it a little more readable. And you can see that it's exactly what we have written already. So that's how I make changes in the browser and then copy it into what I actually want to keep. Moving forward, we're going to be using the inspect tool a lot. And moving forward, you're going to want to rely on the inspect tool to see everything that you can possibly see. Let's take a look at text alignment. So let's say we have an H1 on our page. Hi, my name is Caleb. We can select this H1 and let's do this with an ID. So we've got an ID of intro and we can say, select the H1 with an ID of intro. And in here, by default, this is going to be aligned to the left. So let's refresh our page from what we were working with and it's aligned to the left. Now let's say we wanted it to be centered or to the right. We can absolutely do that. All we do is text align and we can say center, justify, left, right, start, inherit, initial, or unset. We want center. And so when we save this and refresh our page, it's centered. Now, a cool thing we can do here is we can just go up to our element, right click, inspect. Make sure you've selected that H1 and where it says text align center, we can change this. So this is what center looks like. End initial, inherit, justify, left, revert, right. There's all sorts of stuff in here. The ones that you're probably going to work with is going to be left, right, justify when there's enough text. And we're not going to get into that one, and center. So left, right, center, and maybe justify. In this lesson, what I want you to do is create some text, use like an H1, and change that text alignment to be centered. Then open up your inspect tool and change it to be right, like that. Now, if you are writing HTML and you've been writing the center element, no longer use that. You can rely on CSS instead. It's better to use CSS than to use the center element. If you have not been using the center element, please ignore that. You saw nothing. Once you are done that, let's head on over to that next lesson. Let's take a look at borders. So borders are really, really important. They are the primary way that we separate our content from other sections of content. It's how we make things stick out sometimes too. So let's go ahead and create a new div. This has a border, and let's give this a class of red border. And so let's go up here and we can select all of our divs. And when we select all of our divs, let's make sure we also select the divs that only have a red border class. Now we can give this a lot of different border values or properties. We can see there's tons of them in here, but we're really only going to be working with 3 of them. We're going to be working with border width. So border width of some value. We're going to be working with the border style of some value. And we're going to be working with the border color of some particular value. So let's say the width is going to be 5 pixels. The style, we have lots of styles to choose from. So it can be like solid, or let's see what we have here. Solid, dash, dotted, double, groove, hidden, none, outset, and ridge. Let's go with dashed. And the border color is going to be red. Or if we want to use a hex, it's F00. Let's go ahead and refresh our page, and what normally wouldn't have a border now has a border. Now this is really nice for 2 reasons. A, you now have some styling around here. Granted, this is kind of ugly styling, but we do have some styling. And the second nice thing is we can see that this border takes up all this space, so we know for a fact that this is a block element. We learned about block elements in HTML 101 as well. Now there's a shorthand way to do this. We can also say border. We can give it a width, then the style, then the color. So we can say border is 1 pixel, solid black, and because programs read things from top to bottom, it's going to say set that width, set the color, set the style. Oh, but actually, not because it's shorthand, just because we've basically rewritten this a second time down here as shorthand, it's going to accept this one. So it writes this to your page, but it's so fast, when it gets a new rule, it says, okay, overwrite that. So now when I refresh the page, this is going to have a 1 pixel border black.